Welcome to the program. This is a second installment of our show. In case you missed the first installment, what I will be talking about is basically all those things that make us human, and I'm doing that by way of my own story, which is Jason Everett Miller's Guide to Being Human. So let me pop that open. You can find that at gemsguide.com. Let's see here. And once there, you will see this. And today we will be reading Chapter 4, Gordon, Chapter 5, I Want to Be Sedated, and Chapter 6, The Monster, which, if you've been on the site and you've read it, is quite brutal. Last week we read the first three chapters, and you can also find last week's podcast at the site, as well as the Indiegogo Perks and Quirks show that I did with my mom. Yeah. Okay. So I guess on with the program. So first on my list, save it for the club. Save it for the club. Not really sure what that means. I think part of what that means is that at a job I used to have, I was like, hey, I'll dress for success and wear my spiffy ties and my cool shirts, and when what they were really looking for was understated. So save that shit for the club. I guess in life, that could be true as well. You know, in all of your relationships, sometimes being overly bold can be detrimental to actually communicating with the person involved. Number two, juxtaposition, coincidence, and serendipity. Yeah, there's been a lot of that in my life. Different things happening that I really have no control over that somehow end up taking me someplace that felt really negative and desperate to begin with, but ended up to be kind of transcendent. I've started this podcast. I've decided what I was going to do with that expansive tome of an autobiography, Midnight Sun. I've started my consultancy, The Bakery, which has been going off and on for the last 8.5 years, 9 years almost. But now I'm getting sort of more focused and more specific with it. It's a tough job market. You can't really count on being able to find something when you need something. So, I didn't really realize it at the time, but over the last several years, I've been building a network that should enable me to be successful in doing my own thing. So, yeah. And then serendipity, obviously, when you're more open to the universe to send you things that may help you along the way, you're more attuned to it and you see it when it comes, and hopefully humble enough and have you approach things humbly enough that people want to help instead of being like, I don't want to help this guy. He's a dick. Number three, life is resilient. Stand fast. And that sort of plays into number two, obviously, because not only are people's individual lives desperate, but globally and as a species, things are getting fairly desperate. Obviously, that flies underneath the radar. The mainstream media and kind of the people who are in charge of the status quo really don't. Oh, goodness, I'm sore. Really don't want you or us talking about how bad things are going to be. But life is resilient, and the survival instinct is sort of super powerful. And again, if you approach life in a humble way, opportunities will present themselves, and then taking advantage of them will enable you to get out of whatever straits you happen to be in. So, yeah. Number four, remove points of failure. Uh, so, um, in every part of your life, every part of my life, um, it's a it's a process. It's a system of steps to accomplish whatever those goals, whatever my goals happen to be. And points of failure in the process are places where that attaining those goals might likely be go awry. So uh, finding those points, identifying those points, and then mitigating them to the greatest extent possible will help me and help you be more successful. Um, I had an ice dam fall down off of my. I had a bunch of ice on a gutter on my roof, and the whole thing came crashing down. Um, oh, earlier in the week, like Monday, Tuesday. Um, and then it was going to be snowing again, right? So that happened like, yeah, Monday, Tuesday maybe. Then it was going to be snowing on Friday, so I had to get a ladder and button it back up, put the boards back up that had gotten ripped off. So in my mind, as I was thinking about how I was going to go about doing that, I thought of the points of failure. I'm going to be doing this thing by myself. I don't really have any safety gear. It's a ladder against the side of a house. I'm up, whatever, 20 feet. What are the points of failure? Well, obviously the ladder is the biggest point of failure in that, and then not trying to do too much once I got up top. So I'd say the hardest part of that whole job was setting the ladder because there was a ton of snow and I had to make sure that it wasn't going to slip. So I mean that's a simple example, but there was really only one point of failure, and it was that ladder, and my conduct when I was on the ladder. So yeah, thing went without a hitch or injury. Um, and I think it was really because I've learned to slow down and sort of envision each step of everything I'm trying to accomplish. Even applying that to my relationship with my son. Um, Kids are going to be kids, and they're not going to understand things, and it's going to be frustrating as an adult to explain simple shit over and over again. But um, I found that by slowing down my expectations of how quickly he might get things, um, usually just a couple, two or three easy, quick questions will get at the heart of wherever we're, at a jam, and it frees things up. So, yeah. Anyway, moving on. Number five, pay attention to detail. Everything is a system with a series of steps in order. All right. Well, I just talked about that, so number five has been handled. Don't want to beat a dead horse. Number six, fucking lizard people, dude. fucking lizard people, dude. Um, easy to spot when you can see. Um, and really, what that to me, what that is a subset of humanity who really couldn't care less about anything you ever say. Um, they've decided that the way things are, the status quo, the systems and processes that have been growing in this country at least since the Industrial Revolution. Um, yeah, we're more sophisticated, slightly cleaner, but it's still you know very similar to what we had at the beginning. Oddly enough, with all the contracting and no benefits and lack of representation. But anyway, be that as it may, um, the lizard people are it seems to me are the ones who are in charge and really don't have a conscience. They don't care. They probably understand, but they don't really care how their actions and hungers and desires and fears make life so much worse for 99% of everybody else on the planet. Um, as bad as things are in the United States right now, and they're pretty bad for a lot of people in a lot of places. it's immeasurably worse in other areas around the world, and about to even get worse with the climate crisis really starting to pick up speed over the next decade. Um, but really, by the 2030s, um, climate refugees, um, climate impacts to the existing supply chain and corporate, commercial processes, and everything from energy to agriculture. That's going to be a part of our reality, and you can't stop it. It can't be stopped at this point. All we can do is learn to live with it and mitigate how bad it's going to get. Um, and right now, the lizard people stand in the way of making that change. So it's incumbent upon all of us to wake up to who these people are, see them when they're talking to us on television and telling us to vote for them, and then voting for the other guy instead, and then do that over and over again. Because I mean, honestly, if you think about it, we have elections every 2 years. So in 10 years, we could turn over Congress completely. We could turn over the Senate 3 times in 10 years. We could turn over the House 5 times in 10 years completely, 100%. And all it takes is us getting our act together, which I feel like we can. I feel like the millennials are really coming into their own. I think Gen X, my generation, is holding steady. We just gained 5 years of boomers. I think we should take the other 5 years and take Gen X all the way back to 60. I honestly, I think Obama is more of a Gen X president than a boomer president anyway. Um, I've always found like my uncle is 10 years older than me, but we always had a lot in common, musically, pop culture, politics, all that. So that 10-year gap, I think, is much more substantial for kids born in 60 and older, or 60, and up, and prior to 60, because if you were born in 55, then really by the tumultuous point of the 60s and 70s, you were old enough for that to be a touchstone for you. If you were born in 60, you might have only been 10 years old when a lot of stuff was going on. It probably didn't register, depending on who you are and who your parents were and all that. Anyway, moving on to number 7. So I used to watch. Shame to admit it, but I watched a lot of freaking cable news. It was just I felt the need to be informed, and that was the easiest way to get it was to watch the news over on my second monitor while I did whatever I did here because I was working, work from home. So um, I stopped that cold turkey just like you know, as soon as my I lost this gig, I'm like, oh shit, I just upgraded my cable, so I had to cancel that. So there went all my news channels, and rather than get them back through some other mechanism, I'm like, I'll just stop watching news. Like it's all the same. It's bad. It's bad for you. The editorializing doesn't change. The the this horse race mentality to every single issue, black and white, false dichotomies, false equivalencies. I mean, you name the logical fallacy, and it's just endemic in the television news sector. Um, so um, it's like pessimism and doubt is sort of like the new drug. It is analogous to Orwell's, whatever 2 minutes of hate, um, but it, it's not really two. It's like 2 minutes of fear. It's 2 minutes of gaslighting. But it's 24/7. It's not just 2 minutes, right? It's all the fucking time. And that leads and okay, I'll come back to number 8. So the way I've been doing this is since I have 21 items, I have 3 chapters. I'll read a chapter every 7 items. So we'll get to that first chapter. Gordon. The small apartment was in a sketchy area of Anchorage where my 25-year-old dad, Gordon, was already living and working at something or other to make ends barely meet. I was just a kid, so I don't know the exact economics, but I assume based on current knowledge that my mom, Olivia, leaped in with both feet to add as much money as she could to the family's coffers, while Dad did the exact bare minimum to fill in the gaps that remained. I enrolled in the local elementary school, a short walk from our apartment, to finish off the last few months of kindergarten. I assume Abigail went to a sitter nearby while Mom worked full time. Left largely to my own devices, my abrupt reintroduction to the city would set the ground rules for some critical future mistakes when it came to succumbing to even the vaguest hint of peer pressure. Our new digs included an older boy living across the street from us who ran a small crew of miscreants out of a fort dug into the foundation of the rustic garage behind his dilapidated house. We would crawl into the musty darkness via a kid-sized hole and sprawl out in the space beyond. The rough-cut timbers of the floorboards created a low roof overhead, and candles provided a soft flickering light. I don't remember the topics of conversation with that small cohort over those few short months, or how I fell into their company in the first place. But I'll never forget puffing on my first cigarette and blowing the smoke out of my nose without inhaling. Yum. The pleasure of bidding the forbidden, biting the forbidden, was an early rush I still haven't kicked. On the adult front, my folks did their best to reconcile for the second, third time since I was born, but it wasn't long before Dad fucked something up and Mom exited stage right for the third, fourth time with me and my sister in tow. I'm not clear on the details of the demise, but at some point, Mom started dating a friend of theirs from high school, Dr. Demented, a junior partner in his dad's dental practice and a serious catch compared to my perpetually broken father. Dad lived with the man for the single semester of college he attended in Tempe, Arizona, but that wasn't enough to keep Gordon's buddy from swooping in to whisk his wife and kids off to a multi-level bachelor pad on a steep lot in the wooded hills overlooking the Anchorage suburbs. The one feature I clearly remember was a top-of-the-line stereo system occupying a place of worship on shelves made of wide wooden planks on black iron frames. A reel-to-reel tape player, turntable, equalizer, and tuner were hooked neatly together, pounding out walls of sound with a technical precision. Records and reels were tucked into empty spaces throughout the stack, while huge speakers on either side offered counterbalance to the fragile electronics in between. Children were tolerated, barely, and only in transit from our shared quarters in the guest room to the eat-in kitchen and back again. Dr. Demented's room was off limits to anyone under 5 feet tall. With the sum total of our inside world so carefully confined, Abby and I explored the streets beyond those walls with abandon, wandering aimlessly for hours with parents who gave us free rein. Once again, the new kids on the block, I suspect we set out to find friends and trouble. The past being prelude, we probably found both as we settled into O'Malley Elementary School. First grade for me and kindergarten for my sister. It would be our academic home for the next 3 years, longer than any in the many years to follow. We were free to roam each day after school, while Mom worked at the dental office until past 6 most nights, before coming home to cook dinner and play games until bed. At first, Dr. Demented was mostly gone while building a new practice out from underneath the shadow of his father. My dad was also gone, his absence by way of the Alaska State Penal System, where Winnie ended up with a kilo of cocaine in his trunk and no viable explanation that didn't involve ratting out people who would hurt him far worse than the 18-month sentence he served with good behavior. Gordon provided handyman services for the chronically underfunded prison and described it as a relatively painless vacation with 3 meals a day, a place to sleep, and no real danger. Always 9 lives lucky, my dad, to make up for his string of losing hands. When Dr. Demented tired of playing house, a marriage proposal was the next logical step in creating a picture-perfect family, one pre-victimized by a generational legacy of terror. As he had also been a victim of what he lived through at the hands of a sadistic father, an oldest child trying and failing to protect his younger sister and brother from horrible memories not yet cast in stone, each of us playing the role to which we were born. It's getting deep now. The next couple chapters are pretty heavy. So that is chapter 4 of Midnight Sun. That's volume one of Jason Everett Miller's Guide to Being Human. Volume two, I hope, emerges from these conversations, from my list of 21. Um, uh, I feel like uh, I was into politics for like 10 years, and that's all I did was do political data and dig into that sort of thing. And it's such a small part of what it means to be human today in the 21st century. Like, this is such a pivotal time in really the history of humanity. This is where we evolve or we die, or in my estimation, I think both are going to happen. Um, there's a twin timelines theory that says, you know, everybody who's sort of in that more authoritarian mindset will go one way, and everybody who's more in a egalitarian mindset will go the other. I call it Mad Max versus Star Trek. Um, I'm busy creating Star Trek, and I think conversations like this help with that, help bring that zeitgeist into being. Um, uh, by using my own story, which is a is like a microscope, not a microscope. I guess it is kind of a microscope, but that's not what I'm magnifying glass. By turning a magnifying glass on my own story, that I originally wrote to uh, make sure that my yet to be born son knew who I was, where I came from, and what I'd been through, and frankly what I was able to accomplish over the years. Um, and so I started with my earliest memory, which was two and a half, and came forward until just a couple years ago, when I landed in Minneapolis. Um, 84 chapters. That was chapter four, so 80 to go. And so thanks for joining me on that journey. Um, but really, the only reason I'm even sort of so finely focused on my own story is I hope it becomes an analog for everybody's stories. I'm only in unique. I'm only unique insofar as I was able to remember a lot of details and actually was a glutton for punishment enough to write it down and then edit that shit for several years. Um, it's it's actually a journey I would recommend to anybody. Like, the sooner the better. The sooner you can go that deep into who you are and where you've been, even to the point where you go and have conversations with people to verify your own memories, to make sure that you're experiencing a shared reality. Um, it's a spiritual and sort of mental health journey that was actually enormously helpful for me. And I think republishing it and reading it out loud is actually really interesting because I've never done that. And even the one edit I did was just sort of down and dirty quick. So this will be a journey that we take together for sure. So number 8, stop listening to the lizard people. And that really goes into the no more news thing. Or just stop listening to negative people in your life, generally speaking. Um, Anybody who says, "Oh, the problem is X, Y, and Z," and the next words out of their mouth isn't, "But I feel like we can solve it using A, B, and C," then they're not worth listening to. Anybody can point out the problems. Anybody can be a critic. Not everybody can be an editor. Not everybody can offer suggestions that are going to make somebody else's life better, or easier in some way, shape, or form. And that's in everything. So I just lost the thread. Not sure how that what that. Oh yeah, so lizard people, negative people that are never going to offer a solution because frankly they don't care if you solve your problem or not. So stop listening to them because all they're going to do is harsh your buzz. Number 9, compartmentalize. You can't do everything all at once, and that really goes to the other thing, right? Because dude, nobody's completely immune to how other people's opinions and words affect them. But what you can do is sort of feel that, put it in a little box, and then stick it on the shelf. You don't have to have that in your face, in your head, all 24/7. Um, and you can do that with everything in your life. You can do that with email, social media, the news, certainly, family relationships, your kids, Um, we actually have an infinite amount of time, but as humans, spend so much of our time worrying about everything all at once. That's why people can't get to sleep at night. I, as scary as things are right now for me, and trust me, they're scary. Um, I'm not immune to feeling fear, um, but I go right to sleep at night, like bam, like it doesn't need like I it 5 minutes, I'm out. From time to time, it may take me 20 minutes to get to sleep, but it's never like up all night worrying. And I know people who that's a fact for them, and I've asked, why, like, what are you thinking about? But it's like everything. Um, so to me, I think one of the most valuable skills as a human to learn is how you can compartmentalize all these things. Put them on a schedule, like only give them their just due at times that are convenient to you. Um, and for the most part, you'll find that most stuff that you put in a box and stick on the shelf, you'll never look at it again, ever, unless you come back in your 40s and write a really long autobiography. Um, so, number 10, saving lives by being selfish. Um, and this really, had to do with uh, like medical specialties, and if you're not totally into the specialty you're in, um, is it selfish to change specialties even though you're really well trained? Or, and in my estimation, I think it would be selfish to stay. Like, no one, I think that's true of every single job. um, it's the people who do the best at any given job are the ones who are passionate about being in that job. And if you're staying in a job for whatever reason, my mom told me a story about this woman who is in her 60s, I guess, um, kind of semi-retired, and she's in this like social work job at a hospital, and she doesn't really need the money, and she was kind of like, hey, 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 I'm making big dough, and the millennials are a bunch of crybabies, and brr, 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 right? Kind of a right wing Trumpy, um, and it's it's how much damage beyond just sort of like being in a seat that somebody younger could be taking and advancing their career and preparing for. So there's that selfish piece, but there's also the by not having someone who's really passionate about it in that position, the patients are sort of not maybe not necessarily damaged. Maybe she's good at the job, whatever, but not needing a job and being passionate about the job that you need to have is it leads to better outcomes. Having people in a position who are passionate about doing it, and they frankly need the job just to have a decent life, that makes you better at your job. When you need to have that job, you get better at that job because you don't want to lose it. So I think, yeah, I think be selfish. Find what you're passionate about, laser focus on that, and move out of areas and move out of doing things that you aren't passionate about to free up those areas for people who are passionate about it to move in. Like we've gotten stuck in this stasis that has gummed up the works, and I'm not sure how we clear it. I think honestly, artificial intelligence is going to provide a lot of horsepower to clearing out that stasis, because most most people aren't going to have a job. Like a lot of people's 9 to 5 gigs that they have now will go away with AI and automation, because frankly, that's the only way we're going to have the horsepower to combat climate crisis as quick as some things are going to start hitting us. Um, so I don't know. That was a real rambling way of saying, you can be selfish and focus on yourself, and that's not a bad thing. And we were talking about AI. So number 11, organic AI. So I call myself an organic artificial intelligence. And what I mean by that is I feel like because of my career as a journalist in the Navy, because of my almost 2 decades now doing sort of user and client focused technology and creative development, um, it's given me the ability to understand people and how people operate and how people access information in a way that I think would be useful to train artificial intelligence to be useful to humanity in a lot of ways. Um, and honestly, it's to me, I think it goes deeper than just, oh, I was trained as an observer and I'm good at taking notes and coming to a conclusion. I think I've learned sort of an empathy for my subjects that um, uh, highlights um, uh, kind of your main difference in human beings, and I guess human evolution, right? Because there's, if you go back as far as you can go back pre-Mesopotamia, pre-written history anyway. Um, you have different types, right? You had your leader sort of alphas. Even the alpha stuff is bullshit, but we'll use that for shorthand. You had your leader. They were frankly kind of sociopathic. They were really only in it for themselves. The fact that they were able to deliver any sort of benefit to their fellows was accidental at best. You had your seers or your medicine men, your storytellers, usually your poets, prophets, um, and there was obviously a much smaller percentage, and that's where your empaths. And then I think you had the vast majority of people who are neither. I feel like they're empathetic, generally speaking, but they probably have to have it, not necessarily explained to them, but sometimes you got to point out things that might be obvious to somebody who is an empath, and sort of that's their default. Um, so that's there's spectrums of humanity, um, and I think the empaths, where they will come in especially handy over the next several decades, is training artificial intelligence on how humans react, how human beings feel. It's, a lot of people aren't really in touch with their feelings, and because it fucking hurts, and it's hard to learn how to deal with an honest appraisal of how you're feeling, right? Um, and for empaths, there's really just no choice. That's the way we're wired. We're wired to feel that for ourselves. For others, it's all the time. It's constant. Um, and this leads to number 12 for me, and it kind of feeds into the organic AI thing, is and the previous, we were talking about compartmentalization. I think that's why I'm able to function um, in this fashion, despite honestly feeling huge emotional connections to most things and people and events. But I'm able to function because I've learned how to compartmentalize, and that provides a filter to that empathy, right? I can feel that really deeply, but on the shelf, and it's gone like it never existed. Um, and I feel like we can evolve like overnight. So, I'll share that. I've been an angry young man my whole life, right? Even as recently as just a few weeks ago. And I think, maybe that was a defense mechanism, the only sort of defense mechanism, filter, if you will, that I had for those feelings was to use anger. Um, and, I came to the conclusion that it was not doing me any good. It was it delivered zero benefits in my life, and actually had contributed to a significant number of detriments over the years. So I decided I'm not. Nope, I'm done. No more anger. It's done. I'm done. I'm done reacting in that way. Um, that's number 15 too. Funny. Um, you can't say I ain't repetitive. I'll say it to you once. I'll say it again. Then I'll tell you what I told you. Um, because we're humans, we're dense. We need to talk about shit over and over and over again until we get it. So I decided to turn it off, and the more and it's gone, like it honestly, like it never existed. And if you knew me well, and you knew me before, and you knew me now, you'd be like, whoa, that's bizarre, dude. How do you do that? Well, I'm here to tell you. And that's kind of what this podcast is about too. Um, so let's see. Nobody in the Hangout. Let's see if we have any questions on the Facebooks. Got some people. Mike is holding me to something. If I say it, you can hold me to it. All right. So I guess we got a couple people watching live. That's fun. Um, I can't watch it myself because there's a delay, so I'm not even going to worry about that. We do have the Hangout. Let me share that link out again. Um, join the. If you want to come ask a question, you can come in and say hi. If not, just keep listening to the dulcet sounds of Jason Everett Miller. See if Micah answered the what it was he was holding me to. Oh, no anger, dude. I'm seriously, it's gone, bro. It's um been super super helpful actually. So yeah, we can chat about that for sure. I'm happy to discuss that. So number 13, we really are our own worst enemies. And uh, ego is a what? Mind fuck. That's fucking true. And really, the ego is sort of central in my thesis as to how and why humans can be their own worst enemies. Um, and really, for me, a lot of my anger was wrapped up in ego responses. So people would contradict me or not agree with me or what have you, and it really doesn't matter, honestly. Uh, uh, their disagreement doesn't matter. If they don't understand what I'm saying, that doesn't matter. I was allowing other people's actions and reactions to drive my core um, engagement with reality, right? And as soon as I started to recognize that in myself and what that felt like, because it was just a physiological response too, right? Before my mouth ever opened and started saying shit that I shouldn't be saying, my heart would beat. I'd feel like not a red mist because it's not that extreme, but definitely I'd start the adrenaline would pump. I'd get into a fight or fight, and I'm always fight. I mean, that's how I was raised. That's how I was trained. I'm a military man, need a military meal. Um, but that's not a good way to engage with people or reality or anything. So the more I've started to recognize that, obviously I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but I'm working on it. That's something I feel like I can actually perfect. I feel like that's a change that I can perfect. And once it's a part of my sort of emotional DNA, um, then I can, then I won't have to, it won't be a conscious thing. It just won't even be there. So kind of going a little Zen, a little Buddha on this stuff, but I feel like honestly it'll be long term way more productive. I'll get a lot more done, be able to influence things at a much higher level, much more consistently and positively by approaching it from a sort of calm, reasonable, rational, objective, to the greatest extent possible perspective. Um, so number 14, why me? Why my story? And I've talked about this a little bit before. I'm nobody. I mean, I'm somebody to me, and people who know me and are close to me, I feel like they would consider me somebody. But generally speaking, I'm nobody. Um, but I'm everybody. My story is everybody's story. You can go up to the site jemsguide.com, JEMS guide.com, and start to read it. Start with chapter one, work your way up. I'm publishing them, like I said, in order over the next year. We're now This will be 2 weeks in, so 2 weeks, the second week of the effort, and I think you'll find a lot of similarities in my tale, no matter where you come from, what your background is, and I feel like by telling my story as honestly and as um, in an entertaining fashion. Hopefully you enjoy the writing, and by trying to learn as many lessons as I can from my own story, um, in that form, um, it becomes an analog for everyone's story. And I feel like once we sort of start to understand that most of our stories have way more in common than we have not in common, then we can start to envision a future for humanity that is truly egalitarian. And that's not to say it's going to be equal, right? Because in my mind, I feel like you're always going to have sort of an upper echelon of people who are dynamic and they think all the time and they have great ideas and they want to see those ideas come into reality, and they're driven and they're going to do that, right? And they should be compensated for that. And you're always going to have people kind of like my dad who's like, hey, I'll do the bare minimum, I'll slip on through, or whatever, I'll play the margins, which is fine. Cool, that's fine too. We can design a society where both those mindsets can be catered to and provide a spectrum of opportunity, for everyone involved. Um, does that mean there's going to be a ceiling? I don't know, necessarily think we need to create a ceiling. I feel like we need an inviolate floor. I feel like every one of 7.5 billion people on this planet, to the greatest extent possible, should have a roof over their head, 3 squares a day, and access to information. Um, the only way we're going to survive the climate crisis is by energizing and activating, the entire human race to the greatest extent possible. We can't we simply can no longer afford to ignore our only renewable resource, which is people. That's why I feel like even automation, in a lot of ways, is going to rely on human intelligence. I think a lot of artificial intelligence applications will rely on human intelligence to supplement it, because we're going to need to leverage shit again the next 10 to 20 years. We're going to have to really start, large scale mitigation of the climate damage that's already been done, for the human race to survive what comes next. And again, it's not just one thing or the other, right? It's sea level rise, it's crop failures, it's most people live on the coast, so as the sea levels rise, you're going to have climate refugees. It's going to be a freaking mess, and the only way for us to survive that mess is going to be through, pulling together. And I feel like telling our stories, to each other as often as possible, and feeling that connection as humans, will help us build sort of a shared reality and a zeitgeist that will propel us through that to the other side. Only way out right now is through. Can't start over, can't burn down the system to build something new. We have an existing paradigm. It includes corporations with massive amounts of power. It includes rich people with massive amounts of power. It includes, a fairly moribund, vast underbelly of humanity, that will likely only rise to a certain level. But you know what? They shouldn't be the detritus of a system, right? Like they should be able to live a dignified life, even if they don't want to try to scale the heights. So anyway, that's why my story. So that's number 14, on my list, which leads us to chapter 5 in my story, volume 1, Midnight Sun and Guide to Being Human. I want to be sedated. Our would-be stepfather needed a new spread for the family when his house started to fall down. Literally. It was built on an unstable hillside in a subdivision of custom homes where dozens of other would-be masters of the universe also built their starter kingdoms without knowing a huge fault went right through the neighborhood. Mom had been learning the ins and outs of real estate law as part of helping Dr. Demented build his new practice. So she used this new knowledge to get him out of the contract on the unlivable house and help secure the loan for a new one with money left over from building the dental office. She then found a new house at a fire sale price by way of a contractor who was hard up for cash and selling his huge corner lot in a nearby subdivision of custom homes. Next thing I knew, we were living in an enclave of upwardly mobile, upper middle class nuclear families, basking in the heady glow of the American dream. It was an oddly modest, split level home with commanding views of our neighbors from the wraparound deck and a huge yard keeping them at arm's length. The only part of the house near the street was an asphalt driveway leading to two garage doors with curtained bedroom windows overhead. An almost invisible walkway disappeared around the corner to the right of the garage and led to the front door. First floor windows were all above head height, and the yard sloped away in terraced grassy folds to the street below. So the house felt isolated, even in the midst of a fairly dense neighborhood. My best friend's place was now an easy walk through swanky houses on monster wooded lots and a giant gravel pit with discarded cars rusting into art. Depending on the time of year, boys and girls from the surrounding hills would gather at the pit to have snowball fights on snowmobiles well into the endless night after school, or race bicycles along well-worn trails brightened by a summer sun that was up well past bedtime. During winter months, we would meet on schoolyard hockey rinks and slap frozen pucks at each other with more enthusiasm than skill. Summers brought day-long bike rides down the hill to the Diamond Mall, where I practiced shoplifting the latest toys Dr. Demented already kept in steady supply to maintain appearances. This hyperactivity happened outside the purview of adult supervision for the most part, though we stayed amazingly intact given our prepubescent predilection for improvised sport. The BB gun fights stand out as being particularly hazardous, even with gloves, ski goggles, and winter jackets. Any excuse to build a tree fort from scavenged wood and plan elaborate campaigns to capture your competitor's flag, while liberally peppering the enemy with small copper ball bearings under no more than 10 pumps of power. We also jumped our BMX bikes off plywood ramps balanced in all sorts of precarious ways, and helmets were for sissies or pre-existing injuries. Back at Casa de Dentistry, things went from strict to stricter and straight to schizoid 10 seconds after Mom said I do, in a small ceremony in the living room of our new house. There must have been a reception as well, but I don't remember the blessed event in the slightest. The first hint there was a new sheriff in town came when Dad abdicated his parental rights in favor of Dr. Demented's desire to adopt us as his own. Now in legal possession of both wife and kids, the freak flag was free to fly. Impossibly high standards of surgical cleanliness and pharmaceutical fueled parties met in contradictory patinas of pine sol and sweat. The steady barrage of precise beatings left their marks in places where most people never saw. I learned how to take a punch and fake a fall simultaneously, so it wasn't a total waste of time. This skill was especially handy facing down bullies as a teen, since I lacked the ability to simply shut up when my mouth was usually the problem at hand. I'm first to admit I was, and remain to this day, an out-of-control soul hell-bent on wringing every last drop out of every last moment. I kicked ass on all the standardized tests while simultaneously inspiring teachers to design ways to murder a child in their care without getting caught. I would have been drugged to the gills in today's environment, but in 1977 there was no easy way out for parents except through their own exotic mix of medicinal cocktails and alcohol. I think it was a better process, drugging the parents and not the kids, but it did carry with it an increased level of attention needed to keep high-strung youngsters from spinning out of control. To make up for a lack of parental finesse, Dr. Demented favored tougher love over its mouthier cousin. This style of parenting started with the rod, then moved to the belt, the wooden cutting board, and the occasional hurling into a closet door for delivering a bad report card from school requiring a signature. A door that would never be fixed on a closet that would never be used again. I had a second closet that mirrored the first with a dresser in between them, so I was luckier than most kids in my position could claim. And that's the end of chapter 5 of Midnight Sun, volume 1 of Jason Everett Miller's Guide to Being Human. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're about 2/3 of the way through the show. I'm up to number 15. that I had not got to. Oh, I actually kind of did get to already. And what's funny is one of my oldest friends, when I start talking about controlling my anger, um, it's the first thing he makes note of, and that just shows you that it was clearly something that I had to take control of. And So number 15, controlling my anger, and it does get easier the more you do it. And I feel like that's true of everything. This whole slowing down experiment, where I've decided that I was doing things too fast. Life has a rhythm. Every process has a rhythm, and if you're anxious about several steps ahead in the process instead of the step you're currently on, um, you approach it in a way that's not as uh, effective, really, honestly, and it's everywhere. And I think anger is kind of a counterpoint to anxiety. Um, some people, it forces them into a corner, and they're like, I don't want to engage. For me, I'm like, oh, let's engage, fight or flight, right? You're gonna do one or the other. Um, I'm done. Um, I don't know what number 16 means. So number 15 was controlling my anger. I think I've beat that horse into the ground. If you have any questions about that, leave a comment somewhere on the blog. At some point, hopefully, people will start commenting on the shows, and we can interact in the blog on the shows. Um, and also, if you're watching this show, I want to get into publishing other people's content too, right? Volume one is Midnight Sun. That's my story. Volume two is going to be called The Apprentices. Um, and I did that for a number of reasons, but and that's everybody else's story. Volume three, I haven't really named it yet, but I think I'm going to call it The Masters, and I'm going to try to find people again, not me. Although I don't know, maybe I'll be a master by then. Who knows? Maybe there'll be something, some piece of my life over the next several years that I attain mastery of, to where I would feel comfortable putting myself in that list. So, volume one, volume two, volume three, and then this experiment will probably be over, and I'll move on to something else. Um, so, 16, my life has cancer. Crowdsourcing for creatives. Um, you know, because I mean, it's tragic. I don't mean to make light of it, but uh, in a tough job market, when you're just trying to make ends meet, um, if you unexpectedly lose a job, or if you're unexpectedly thrust into rougher seas, um, that's just as damaging, if not more damaging, as a diagnosis of cancer, right? And because our health insurance system is so fucked up, um, people have had to start raising money. Um, I guess GoFundMe is the most popular one for medical fundraisers. Um, but I think a lot of these Indiegogo and Kickstarter are creative people with creative skills of whatever, whether it's designing products, or making films, or doing podcasts, or writing blogs, what have you. They're using crowdsourcing to supplement what is a rough job market. And I think it's valid. I think it has every bit as I. It's again, it's sad that it's a necessity. Like there's, I don't know what makes sense of how to get paid for any of this, right? And maybe I'll figure out a way to get paid for it. Um, I have some ideas of of how we can reorder the economy, and I think I'm getting to that here soon. Oh, Micah's watching. You're gonna enjoy this next part, Micah. Uh, all the way through the end. It was inspired by our recent conversation. Um, funny. You should pop into the hangout. We'll talk about it. No, probably not. That'll put my anger theory to the test. Anyway, uh, so I think if you've seen creative people in your life who are doing crowdfunding, if somebody is to the point where they're trying to raise money through those mechanisms, it's because they'd like to figure out a way to make their creative passions pay the bills. And if you're in a position because maybe you don't have a similar sort of output for your own, but you could easily, um, see yourself supporting someone else's endeavors, throw them a couple bucks. Think of their life as having cancer and needing your help to sort of get through to the next level to survive. Um, it's an unfortunate fact that a lot of us, and even some of us with who you would think have the most, are one unseen, unplanned event away from complete and utter disaster. Um, and Climate change is going to add a ridiculous sort of wild card aspect to that, right? Depending on where you live, you could be wiped out like that. And we've seen that already here in the United States. Superstorm Sandy, if it had just juked one way or the other, gone up the Chesapeake Bay, for instance, Kim Stanley Robinson has a whole series of books, starting with 40 Signs of Rain, um, that talk about that and the climate crisis and some of the things that could be happening and things that they were saying were going to happen, in 2100 and beyond. They're now predicting are going to happen in 2030, 2040. So we need to get prepared for that. And I think a lot of that is reordering the economy and what we value. And I feel like, we don't place value on the right things, right? Someone who's good with kids, for instance, to me, being good with kids and providing daycare is sort of a valuable societal thing. I like the way France approaches a lot of those things. And yes, they have a quote unquote massive welfare state or what have you. But that's kind of the price you pay to keep people from living and dying on the streets, right? Um, so I feel like, if you have a floor to the system, an inviolate floor where, if you're a family, for instance, see, the thing that a lot of people don't get, a lot of the bootstrap people don't get, is that by providing the basic necessities, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those first three levels, the widest levels, food, shelter, security, um, access to information, and opportunity, leads you to self-actualization and being even bigger things, right, later on. But that those basics, um, we need to, if we can't provide that for everybody on the planet, regardless of their situation, but once you start providing that, your birth rates fall, right? So it's not like, oh, someone's going to be on the dole and they're going to have 10 freaking kids because it gives them more money. Well, no, it's just not the way that the system would work. It would be, it'd be kind of like in the military. That's what the thing I love about military service is, if you're single and of whatever, you live in the barracks, you live on base, you go eat in the cafeteria, all your squares. So your monthly income, your basic um, income is less than like somebody who has a family and needs to provide for their support. Maybe they have a little house with a couple bedrooms. It's nothing extravagant. Um, but that's sort of the basics, right? We can even call it basic. I'll trademark that. Basic. But so if I'm single, I get basic, and I'm living in the dorms, and I eat in my dorm. There's a cafeteria with kick-ass good food that's grown, semi-locally in urban farms. Um, there's a way to order all of this. The supply chain is going to get wrecked. The how we do business right now is going to have to be completely localized, even while we maintain sort of a global strategy, to combat some of the things that have already happened, drawing down carbon, for instance. I feel like there's several really cool technologies, that will take carbon and turn it into carbon nanotubes. And once we can do that cheaply, once we have carbon nanotubes, then you're talking replicators or 3D printers for everything. Like Westworld, if you've had a chance to see that on HBO, amazing show. Well, being able to create the 3D printed stuff like that is relatively, I don't want to call it simple, but it's something we could get to. Um, but to get there, we need to come together as as a species. I mean, I don't think nationalism is ever going to go away per se. But I think once we actually start seeing the climate crisis right now is too, it's not as extreme or dramatic as it needs to be to really force action. Um, it's kind of is, we're nibbling around the edges. But in terms of the Paris Accords were a part of that. But honestly, to force sort of combined um, action on a global scale, we're going to have to see some big thing. I mean, I hate to say it, but places are going to get wiped off the fucking map. And once that happens, the whole system's going to change. The governments, policies, corporations, rich people, poor people, all of it's going to have to change. And I feel like, the basics of that is like, everybody's going to need some place to live. We're going to have to create public structures that uh, this idea that private versus public is somehow a healthy debate to have is absurd to me. They should be complementary ideas, right? Um, to the extent that you provide public infrastructure and the public ability to not fall through the cracks and die on the streets, whether that's from a bad situation at home or abuse or substance abuse or PTSD or you went to war and you came home and you didn't have anybody, whatever the case may be, if we can provide for those things with public infrastructure, I think that the private edifice that gets built atop that, the sky's the limit. Then we start talking, oh, we can go to the stars, we can do all kinds of shit. And I think there's going to be a private for-profit component of that. But I feel like the things we should turn into more nonprofit are things like, public housing. That's not to say all housing, but we should have a public housing component. Free is the most affordable housing you can get, right? So if you're a citizen, and I feel like globally, but we'll start with the United States. If you're a citizen of the United States, you should be able to stay in a U.S. hostel, USA hostel or whatever, and have a roof over your head. And you should be transient. Why can't I move around? Maybe I want to live in Chicago for a couple years. I want to move here, move there. So just like in the military, we should facilitate human movement to the greatest extent possible because um, it will help us respond to the changes and the chaos that is coming. Um, so the basics. So yeah, so once we provide the basics, and that would include healthcare, obviously, education, and housing, um, then I feel like the sky's the limit at that point. And I think we'll enable a lot of entrepreneurs. We'll enable a lot of people that are falling through the cracks right now that might otherwise never be heard of. And we'll do it in all kinds of places: medicine, science, art, music. Like if so, that gets back to sort of universal basic income, right? So I feel like we need to have a universal basic income. Call it basic. That's perfect. It's a great freaking brand, actually. You need to write that shit down. Actually, I think I already did write it down in my plans for world domination. um, so we'll talk about that at some point. We haven't got there yet. I don't know if I know you well enough to share those plans. But if once everybody's on basic, then you can start to plan for more than basic, right? If you're just a basic kind of person and that's all you want is I'm going to have a studio apartment. I'll have broadband internet, 1,000 fucking channels, whatever the fuck. Maybe basic is 70 channels, but you can spend of your universal basic income, which is, I don't know, if you had your meals and your housing taken care of and your uh, uh, sort of basic internet access with sort of basic sort of channels, you wouldn't need much in terms of income, right? Maybe your basic universal income is an additional $500 or whatever. That's let me see, 250. Let's say 250. Let's say 1,000 a month, right? 250 a week, and then out of that you can upgrade your basic, right? You can do basic plus. I'm going to stay in my dorm room, but I want a better sound system and I'm willing to, spend some of my dough for that. I want extra channels. I'll spend some of my dough for that. What have you, right? So you get the basic idea. um, but if that's not good enough for you, if you're not a basic kind of person, if you want to like go beyond sort of public education, you want to attend a more of a private school, maybe we subsidize loans for that, right? I don't necessarily think that, I think schools should be mostly if it's a public university, it should be like free or next to free. Like we need to get back to affordable education for people who want to go beyond high school, or a trade school. But we should give like we should have green jobs training, right? Like that should be like that should be the basic requirement, right? If you're going to be in basic, you got to give back, right? It's not just a free ride either. We can build things into that. Hey, I'm on basic. I got to work 4 hours a day. I don't. 8 hours a day is ridiculous. Most people only work 4 hours out of those 8 hours. So we need to this Protestant work ethic, this idea that you got to kill yourself for 16, 18 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week, to get ahead, I think is ridiculous. And actually, studies have proven that you're not as effective. You're actually way more effective when you don't have a stress in your life, and the stress of just making ends meet and keeping a roof over your head tends to impact lots of people in very negative ways, myself included. Anyway, moving on. So 17, Masters of the Universe, partying like it's 1929, the next economy. That's kind of, I was just talking about that actually. I think, uh, like the late 20s, leading into the Great Depression, we have this stratification in society and the haves and the have-nots, and people who most recently were consider themselves haves, right, are now in dire straits, up and down the economic ladder. It's only when you get to that top 5% and higher, that there's any sort of stability in the job market. And even people at the bottom of that 5 to 1%, like 5, 4, 3, 2, those guys, are leveraged and maybe a step or two away from disaster, like the rest of us. But they're just have nicer shit. Um, so the next economy that's going to emerge out of that collapse, and I do believe there's some sort of it's like many trillions in student loan debt. There will be a collapse, and it's going to happen relatively soon. It's probably going to coincide with some fairly dramatic climate change events. So, um, we talked about serendipity and juxtaposition and coincidence earlier, and I feel like the larger, that's micro in my own life, but I think the larger macro, the meta reality, for humanity, proves that there's a lot of convergences of things coming right now. Authoritarianism versus progressivism. Um, again, the climate crisis heating up in various and sundry ways, measurable, dramatic ways, right? So only the most dense sort of Kool-Aid drinker doesn't get that at this point. Unfortunately, what it tends to do, because it's so big and so hard to fathom, it just shuts people down. Like they just rather not think about it because it's existential, right? Existential threats. There's a reason why people freeze, and only a small percentage of people actually turn into that skid and try to think of ways to get out of that shit. Um, and that's why, no matter how we order the economy, there's always going to be stratification. You'll have basic, and whether you're a single person or a family with a couple of kids, um, we don't have to control anything. Opportunity provides controls, right? Once people are no longer in a subsistence sort of environment, they naturally fall into, hey, they have a couple kids, they have a fairly modest life. But there's going to be some people whose that's not enough. Hey, I want a custom home. I want my own home. I want an old home. What have you? I want something outside of the basic that everybody else has, and I'm willing to work for that, right? So go get a job. You don't lose your basic. Your basic has that's just your right as a human. I think every human has a right to a percentage of the global GDP, right? And that percentage is equal to your basic living needs. Um, Anything above and beyond that, it's on you. So you can take your basic and roll the dice. If let's say universal basic income is 1,000 a month, and then all the additional benefits are like 500 a month, so 1,500 a month. If you move out of basic, you have 1,500 a month to play with. Um, maybe you got a good job, and that just goes straight into a college fund for your kid or whatever. Um, or you can use it to pay down debt, right? Um, excuse me. Wearing these headphones can be a pain, um, but I think it will help with the audio track, actually. still working on the format here, so I appreciate you guys working with me. Um, where was I? Oh yeah, the next economy. So number 17, the next economy is it has to be egalitarian. But again, that's not going to mean equal. Um, we will still have people who have mansions and too much stuff. But the key is that we won't have people with nothing. And once we build a society where there's no longer a single person, and granted, okay, nothing's 100%, right? You're still going to have weird people who fall through the cracks or want to go live in the woods and have nothing to do with the rest of us, whatever. Well, let's say 10%. I always have a 10% rule. So let's assume that 10% of humanity wants nothing to do with any of us and screw your basic, right? But for the rest of us, why shouldn't we just sort of pull together and I feel like once we have that floor to the system, we can literally provide for 90% of everybody on the planet. And our current resources, the way we allocate resources, the way we distribute resources, um, if we approached it from a standpoint of providing for 90% of us, we would be more efficient, more green in how we use those resources, right? We would build these buildings would be, super efficient and insulated and probably, provide their own power. You could maybe even have, oh, dude, you could have put the freaking urban farms right in the basic living quarters, and their 4 hours a day that they have to work could be tending to the plants for everybody else, in the surrounding areas. Like, there's so many different ways that, we could be doing things better than we are today. Um, so number 18, Medicare for all, is kind of one of those things. Uh, I don't think it's going to be a silver bullet, but having recently been inside like the largest healthcare company in the world, they could use some structure and some regulation and some eyes on, that are a little less uh, that provide a little less wiggle room than the current regulatory structure does. Um, I feel like, we're to the point now where we really need to go to a nonprofit structure for health insurers. Um, that's the only possible way that people will stop going bankrupt from getting sick. Um, and then, once we have a Medicare for all system, and I actually have some ideas around the data aspect of that. Um, the data aspect of that system would actually deliver benefits in long-term cost reductions, right? You have to have everybody in the same system so you can understand where the issues are, understand where most of the costs are, and start to develop strategies to lower those costs. I feel like, just about every country in the world with some sort of universal healthcare system is getting better outcomes than we are. So um, clearly, there's a way to the ACA started to do that, the Affordable Care Act, but the Republican Party are a bunch of hypocrites, and they not a single one of them voted for a frickin' Republican bill, right? That came out of the Heritage Foundation in response to Hillary Care. So that's how long this shit's been kicking around the zeitgeist. I said zeitgeist twice in the same show. Sorry, Sean. And not to bag on the Daily Zeitgeist people either, because I love that podcast. I'm just not fucking with politics right now. If I was going to start fucking with any podcast, it would be that one, though, because they don't just talk about politics, they talk about other shit. And it's a great show. Shut up. So anyway, the cons of Medicare for all obviously is that it's a system itself that needs a lot of repair. There's a 20% gap in funding that falls on the people who have Medicare. Um, there's unequal distribution of healthcare facilities. So uh, it would not be a silver bullet. But I think what a Medicare for all system would provide is a national structure that is inviolate and has no wiggle room. The way the ACA was implemented was, even to get it signed, it had some fairly large compromises within it. The biggest one of which was the public option going away, and the second biggest one of which was the Supreme Court ruling early on that said, yes, it's constitutional, but states have a right to not fucking do it. And so like 30 states, 30 Republican states refused to expand Medicaid, which was the thing that was going to make the public exchanges of commercial health insurance work. So yes, the growth of spending dramatically slowed. Like 20 million more people got access to healthcare, but we still had 30 million people without. And we still had, a lot of people dissatisfied with the outcomes because, they had to change doctors or what have you, right? Whatever anecdotal personal bullshit that people use to disagree with broad social progress. All that happened, and it was a consequence of not having a sort of national buy-in for the plan. So I feel like Medicare for all. I'd like to see it go through like an amendment process. Like that shit should be in the fucking Constitution. Like we need like a second Bill of Rights, right? Human Bill of Rights. Let's put basic in that shit. Universal basic income, fucking public housing, Medicare for all, motherfucking, at least basic college education. Let's say through your first 2 years. If you can get through your first 2 years, we'll supplement the rest as high as you want to go. You're going to pay for it, but it's not going to be like, oh, you're going to be $100,000 in debt. And we're going to have places for you to go, right? So you need to not only be able to manage whatever debt comes out of that process, but you need to have a job that's going to be stable and provide the ability to pay it back. Um, I understand the reluctance. How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for any of this shit? Any of the excesses of the current system that we currently aren't paying for are just getting added to the debit card, and fucking climate crisis is going to make us pay that shit soon. So this idea that we're somehow paying for our current system is absurd. So why can't we design a better system? We the fun how we pay for it, it's all monopoly money. We just figure out a different way to order the current set of resources towards better outcomes. That's that's my story. I'm sticking to it. So number 19, getting old. So I'll be 49 this year. So pushing up on 50 really fast, faster than I really want to admit. I was doing the math on my friend Micah, who commented on the stream, uh, on how long we've been friends. I'm like, holy shit, it's almost 30 years. I'm like, really? I thought it was like 10 years. Like the 90s were 10 years ago, right? Um, and my son's mom, we've been saying that for years because it's just you keep getting older, but you feel the same age inside. So doing the math is never great. Um, so yeah, I just thought that was funny. Something that occurred to me that I don't feel tardy. Um, what's really nice that helps keep you young is when the current generation, the millennial, like younger millennials and Gen Z, are now nostalgic about Gen X shit. So so now they're all kind of nostalgic about shit that was cool when I was younger. That makes me feel young. It like kind of re-energizes me. It gives me sort of a new lease on life with a much younger crowd, and we have a lot in common. And I'm a digital transplant, so I've been working on technology, so I'm not like fuddy duddy. Technology doesn't freak me out. I don't. It's pretty second nature to me at this point. So getting old doesn't have to be bad. Um, and I feel pretty good. I don't work out a lot, but I've been doing a lot of working out with all the snow we've had around here in Minneapolis, and having to fix my roof up and down that ladder. So walking the stairs at work for a couple months definitely helped with that. Being prepared for that. Number 20. Here's where Micah will probably leap in, uh, guns ablazing. So I think the future is going to be MBAs versus PhDs. I feel like the MBA mindset, while perhaps valuable in certain ways, has also led to some fairly specific and uh, frankly suicidal outcomes for our system as a whole. We've really pursued profit um, to excess, in my opinion. Um, you know, this whole planned obsolescence thing. Um, I don't know where it came from. I don't know how it ended up in sort of corporate standard philosophy. But this idea that if things break, people are just going to keep replacing them indefinitely, is somehow good, because you make more money every time someone has to replace something they already bought once. Um, that's not a sustainable system. We need closed loop manufacturing. Um, I think we need to have science informing a lot more of our corporate processes, and sort of what are we trying to accomplish as a society? Are we trying to just have endless choices of mediocre products made by slave labor on the other side of the planet, um, that half the time don't fit right, don't work right, they break sooner than you would have expected? Is that it's like Wall-E, the movie Wall-E, where at it's just a planet full of fucking garbage, and these automated factories, or maybe that's a different, that might be a different show actually. Automated factories just building shit for, anyway. We're to that stage right now, and to my way of thinking, it's not, if it's not sustainable, it's not going to survive the transition we're currently in, and that's where I think MBAs can kind of get ahead of the game, right? They can start to um, help PhDs sort of pay for how we're going to redesign society. Like, I still think they can be valuable. There's a lot of things that artificial intelligence is already doing. A lot of lawyers' tasks. I think a lot of the financial tasks that are currently assigned to MBAs will likely be done by AI. I think a lot of development tasks like coders and shit will be done by AI. But there's still a lot of creative thinking in people who have MBAs that goes beyond sort of the nuts and bolts of running a business. And I feel like combining that, like right now, I feel like they're at odds with PhDs and the more scientific set. But I feel like if we can harness those two sets of energy towards complementary ends, that could create the society that I'm kind of talking about here. So that's number 20, MBAs versus PhDs. Well, it's I'm gonna coin a new hashtag, FutureCast. So I'm interested to see how the what the FutureCast looks like on that one, because they're going to be invaluable. They're going to be on the front lines of the climate crisis. They already are on the front lines of the climate crisis. They're living in Alaska, the Arctic, the Antarctic. They're out on these islands. I mean, they're the unsung heroes of our society right now. The least known and the most sort of in the best informed. So it's they're going to be the very first resource we turn to when things really get fucked up. Um, but I feel like to the extent that we can get them working together, that'll be good. So number 21, and then we'll read the last chapter. And oh, this show's actually gone for quite a while. That's funny. Uh, 21, is that the best you can do? Probably not. Um, and that kind of gets back to what I was talking about before. We can't really control other people. We can't control how they act, how they react, but we can control ourselves. And when you're doing your best, and do you offer your best at every turn? Um, do you feel incapable of delivering your best at every turn because you have too much going on in your life? That's where compartmentalization comes in, right? If you can start to pull things out of RAM and put it in ROM, random access memory versus read-only memory. So if you can be better at transferring things out of this sort of permanent memory, that this active consciousness that you have in your life, and store it on the shelf, that frees up the ability to be better at the current task at hand, right? If you're not constantly anxious about 3, 4, 5, 6 steps ahead, when you're focused, uh, to the greatest, again, 90%, 10% rule. 10% of your mind, you're not gonna be able to focus, but you should be able to focus 90% of that shit on what you're doing now, or make a conscious decision to be diffuse in it, right? So you may be fucking with social media and watching some movies or whatever, right? You don't always, but you need to have the ability to focus 90% on a single task, and that's how you're doing your best, right? You're doing your best when you need to do your best. You can do your best, right? Um, and if you're not, it's a conscious choice not to instead of a habitual one. And I'm trying to do that again in my own life. This isn't something I'm trying to project out on y'all. This is something I'm actively trying to do today, right now, in my own life, in my own relationships with my son, with my ex, with my mom, with my siblings, with my best friends, with former friends, colleagues, what have you. Um, I what do we got here? Oh yeah, I think I have figured out a way to be more conscious in how I approach each one of those uh, processes. It's not the right word. I'm gonna have to come up with a different word, but it really is a process, right? Every relationship has a rhythm and a flow. There's steps involved. There's commitments. There's plans. Whatever. It's all a process. Um, so I'm trying to be better in my own life, be more conscious of how I approach each one of those relationships, um, so that I can look on my life and go, yeah, I am doing my best. Sometimes my best isn't good enough. Oftentimes my best isn't good enough, but I don't feel bad about myself for that. I'm always going to try my best, and sometimes that's going to piss people off. But again, you can't control other people, right? All you can do is control yourself. And if my best pisses other people off, so be it. I'm not going to let that piss me off. I'm done with the anger. It's we're all going to have to be. We're very angry as a society, and I feel like we're all going to have to be done with the anger. One love. So that's a shout out to my boy in Jamaica, Varun. So hopefully we can hook up soon because I got a lot of ideas around the island, and how we can put some of these ideas into action over the coming years. Anyway, I love you guys. I appreciate you tuning in. If you got a couple bucks, check out the Indiegogo campaign. There's different levels, perk levels. Next week, I'll be doing an Indiegogo supporter show. If I don't have any supporters, I guess I'll just do a behind the scenes show um, with. I'll just find somebody that I can interview behind the scenes for the more informal show that I'm trying to do in between the 2 week shows. That's the more formal pie, whatever. So yeah, I love you guys. Take care. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you around soon. Bye bye. Oh wait, I forgot to read the last chapter. Duh. All right, let's read the last chapter, and then we'll say goodbye. The monster. Oh, that's why I didn't want to read that. Okay. My second escape attempt came during our third year in lovely Shangri-La. My stepfather became especially heavy-handed as the winter months settled in. 20 hours of darkness makes a person cranky, and what better way to beat the doldrums than by beating your kids? I suspect he took out job frustrations as well, since assaulting one's patients is not the best way to earn repeat business. We couldn't fire him, and Mom was dealing with issues of her own, so my subconscious was working hard to find a solution for my dilemma. As has been the case for most of my life, the plan I came up with was to get out as soon as possible. The day in question began with a beatdown that was epic in both scope and duration. I earned my punishment for using more than 3 sheets of toilet paper or leaving the cap off the toothpaste, some sort of grooming related offense that could not be tolerated without harsh and immediate punishment. A backhand across the face may have come first, though that one was usually reserved for special occasions when creating an excuse for the damage was worth the satisfaction of the blow. It definitely started in the bathroom Abby and I shared before careening into my small bedroom next door for round number 2. The broken closet door was a favorite target, so the violent toss into the closet served as a sadistic punctuation mark to the run-on sentence from hell. Dr. Demented tired out at some point and stormed from the bedroom, slamming the door behind him, a promise of pain yet to come. I hit the ground and lay still, save involuntary tremors of exhaustion and fear. My ears searched for footsteps that didn't return, signaling the time to move from the floor to the much more comfortable platform bed. Nothing but the best from Ethan Allen on display at our house, even better if it doubled as something useful. Heavy curtains on the window kept the sun at bay during the bright summer months and created a dim cave in the winter. I cried myself to sleep, curled in the protective embrace of my Incredible Hulk bedspread as the room faded to darkness. I hadn't eaten since a relatively normal family breakfast hours earlier, but the grumbling belly that woke me up wasn't nearly enough motivation to face down the monster raging quietly in the halls beyond my bedroom door. This wouldn't be the first meal I missed in favor of not getting my ass kicked. Instead, I stuffed my most prized possessions into a small backpack